The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September of 1882, and Laura Vance knew, before she opened it, that her life was about to shatter into pieces too small to ever fit back together properly. Her husband Daniel had been killed in a mining accident outside of Denver, crushed when a support beam gave way in the silver mine where he had worked for the past 3 years. She stood in the parlor of their modest home in Alta, Utah, holding the yellow paper with trembling hands while the autumn sun streamed through the lace curtains she had hung just last spring, when everything still made sense. That had been 11 months ago, and the people of Alta expected her to be done with her grieving by now. They expected her to remove her black mourning dress and return to the socials at the church. They expected her to smile again, to laugh at jokes, to consider the attentions of the 3 widowers who had already made their interest known. Her mother-in-law had been the most vocal about it, suggesting just last week that Daniel would have wanted Laura to move forward, to find happiness again, to give his memory the respect of not wallowing in sadness forever. But Laura was not ready, and she resented every gentle suggestion that implied she should be. At 24 years old, she had been married for only 4 years before Daniel was taken from her. They had been planning to start a family that very autumn. She was not ready to pack away his belongings, or stop wearing the wedding ring he had placed on her finger, or pretend that another man could ever fill the space he had left behind. She had taken work at the general store to support herself, spending long days measuring out flour and sugar, cutting fabric, and listening to the gossip of the mining town. Alta sat high in the Wasatch Mountains, a place where silver had drawn people from all corners of the country seeking fortune. It was a hard town, a practical town, and sentiment was a luxury most folks could not afford for long. The afternoon was turning toward evening when the cowboy walked into the store. Laura was restocking shelves, her black dress dusty from the work, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a simple bun. She heard the door open and turned to offer her standard greeting, but the words caught in her throat when she saw him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a man who spent his life working hard. His hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes that she could feel watching her even before he removed it respectfully. When he did, she saw a face weathered by sun and wind, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that struck her most, a clear gray that seemed to see far too much. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice low and rough like stones tumbling in a creek. "I am looking for work gloves and some tobacco if you have it." "We have both," Laura replied, grateful that her voice came out steady. "The gloves are on the back wall and tobacco is behind the counter." He nodded and moved past her, and she caught the scent of leather and horse in the open trail. She forced herself to focus on her work, but she was aware of his presence in the small store, aware of the quiet way he moved despite his size. When he brought the gloves to the counter, she rang up his purchase and retrieved the tobacco. "That will be $1.15, she said. He counted out the coins carefully and placed them in her hand. His fingers were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who knew hard labor. "Thank you, madam." He paused, then added, "I am Samuel Xavier. I just hired on at the Thompson Ranch outside of town." "Laura Vance," she replied automatically, then wished she had not. She did not want to know his name or have him know hers. She did not want any new people in her life. But Samuel Xavier just nodded as if she had given him nothing more significant than the time of day. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance." He touched the brim of his hat and walked out, the door closing softly behind him. Laura exhaled slowly and realized her heart was beating faster than it should. She told herself it was simply because she was not used to strangers anymore, not used to being looked at by men. It meant nothing. It would mean nothing over the following weeks. Samuel Xavier came into the store regularly. He never lingered, never made conversation beyond what was necessary, but Laura found herself noticing things about him. He always removed his hat when he entered. He always said please and thank you. He bought practical things, never tobacco after that first time, just supplies for work and living. He had a scar across his left hand that looked like it had been made by barbed wire. Other people in town began to talk about him. He was a hard worker, they said. Quiet, kept to himself, but good with horses and cattle. The Thompson ranch had been struggling since old Edward Thompson took ill, but with Samuel's help, things were beginning to turn around. He had come from Wyoming, someone said, or maybe Colorado. No one seemed to know for certain, and Samuel himself offered no information about his past. Laura's mother-in-law visited one Saturday afternoon while Laura was closing the store. Margaret Vance was a stern woman in her 50s who had never quite warmed to Laura, always maintaining that Daniel could have done better than a farmer's daughter with no particular skills or connections. "You are looking thin," Margaret said without preamble. "Are you eating properly?" "I eat fine," Laura replied, sweeping the floor with more vigor than necessary. "The widow Henderson mentioned that Robert Fletcher has been asking about you," Margaret continued. Robert Fletcher was a mine supervisor, a man of 45 with 3 grown children and a fondness for whiskey. "He is a good man with steady work." "I am not interested in Robert Fletcher's attentions," Laura said firmly. "It has been nearly a year, Laura. Daniel would not want you to spend your life alone." Laura set down the broom and faced her mother-in-law. "With respect, Margaret, you do not know what Daniel would have wanted, and neither do I, because he is not here to tell us. What I do know is that I am not ready to consider any man, and I may never be. That is my choice to make." Margaret's lips thinned. "You are being selfish. A woman alone is a burden on the community. You should be thinking of your future." "I am thinking of my future," Laura said quietly. "And right now, my future involves working hard and taking care of myself. That is all I can manage." After Margaret left, Laura locked the store and walked home through the dusty streets. The evening was cool, autumn settling into the mountains with the promise of the hard winter to come. She passed the church where she and Daniel had married, past the boarding house where they had first lived before saving enough for their own small home. She was so lost in thought that she did not notice the man stepping out of the saloon until she nearly collided with him. He grabbed her arm to steady her, and she smelled the whiskey on his breath before she recognized Robert Fletcher. "Well now, Mrs. Vance," he said, not releasing her arm. "Fancy running into you." "Excuse me, Mr. Fletcher," Laura said, trying to pull away. His grip tightened. "No need to rush off," he said. "I have been meaning to speak with you. I figure enough time has passed that we might have dinner together. Get to know each other better." "I am not interested, Mr. Fletcher. Please let go of my arm." "Now don't be hasty," he said, pulling her closer. "A woman like you needs a man to look after her. I could make things real comfortable for you." "The lady asked you to let go," a low voice said behind them. Laura turned her head and saw Samuel Xavier standing a few feet away. He was not making any threatening moves, but there was something in his posture, in the way he stood, that suggested he would act if necessary. Robert Fletcher sneered. "This is not your concern, Cowboy. The lady and I are just having a conversation." "Does not look like much of a conversation," Samuel said calmly. "Looks more like you are not listening when she says no." Fletcher's face reddened with anger and drink. "You are new here, so maybe you do not know how things work. This is between me and the lady." "It stops being between you and the lady when you put your hands on her against her will," Samuel said. his voice still level but with steel underneath. "Let her go, and we will forget this happened." For a moment, Laura thought Fletcher would refuse. She could feel the tension in his grip, see the calculation in his eyes. But Samuel took a step forward, and something in that movement made Fletcher release her arm and step back. "Not worth the trouble anyway," Fletcher muttered. "Woman's got no gratitude." He stumbled back into the saloon, and Laura released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Are you all right, madam?" Samuel asked. "Yes," Laura said, rubbing her arm where Fletcher had gripped it. "Thank you. You did not have to do that." "I did," he said simply. "Can I walk you home?" "Make sure you get there safely." Laura hesitated. She wanted to refuse, to maintain her distance, to keep everyone at arm's length where they could not hurt her. But her arm was throbbing, and the encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "All right," she said quietly. They walked in silence for a few minutes, Samuel keeping a respectful distance beside her. The street was quiet now, most folks inside having dinner or settling in for the evening. Finally, Laura said, "I imagine you have heard the gossip about me." "Some," Samuel admitted. "And you have heard that people think I should be over my grief by now, that I should be moving on." He was quiet for a moment before answering. "I have heard people say a lot of things about a lot of subjects. Does not mean they are right." Laura glanced at him, surprised. "You do not think I should be moving on?" "I think you should move at whatever speed feels right to you," he said. "Nobody else has to live your life. Nobody else has to carry what you are carrying. They do not get to decide when you put it down." Something in Laura's chest loosened, a knot she had not realized was there. They had reached her small house, and she stopped at the gate. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier, for what you said to Mr. Fletcher, and for walking me home, and for understanding." "Samuel," he said, "and you are welcome, Mrs. Vance." "Laura," she replied before she could stop herself. He smiled then, just a slight curve of his lips, but it transformed his face entirely. "Good night, Laura." "Good night, Samuel." She watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him back toward the boarding house where he stayed. Then she went inside her empty house and lit the lamps and made herself a simple dinner of bread and cheese. But that night, for the first time in months, she did not cry herself to sleep. The next morning was Sunday, and Laura forced herself to attend church as she did most weeks. She sat in her usual pew, alone despite the crowded building, and listened to Pastor Williams speak about forgiveness and moving forward in faith. She wondered if he had crafted the sermon with her in mind. After the service, as she was leaving, she saw Samuel standing near the back of the church. He was clean-shaven now, wearing a pressed shirt and vest, his hat in his hands. He caught her eye and she nodded back before Margaret intercepted her. "I heard about the incident with Robert Fletcher last night," Margaret said disapprovingly. "People are saying that Cowboy from the Thompson Ranch interfered." "Samuel Xavier prevented Mr. Fletcher from accosting me on the street," Laura corrected. "I was grateful for his intervention." "You should be careful," Margaret warned. "You do not know anything about that man. He could be a drifter, a criminal, anything. And now people are going to talk about you two being seen together." "We were not together," Laura said, her patience fraying. "He walked me home to ensure my safety, that is all." But she could see other women watching her, whispering behind their hands, and she knew Margaret was right about one thing. People would talk. In a town like Alta, people always talked. Over the next few weeks, Laura found herself thinking about Samuel more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was only because he had been kind to her, because he had understood what no one else seemed to grasp. But she could not deny the way her pulse quickened when he came into the store, or the way she found herself watching for him on the street. For his part, Samuel maintained his respectful distance. He came into the store for supplies, always polite, sometimes exchanging a few words about the weather or the ranch, but never pushing for more. Once, when she was struggling to lift a heavy crate, he appeared at her side and moved it for her without being asked. Another time, when she was closing up during a rainstorm, he waited outside with an umbrella and walked her home without a word. People noticed, of course. The whispers grew louder. Laura Vance and the cowboy from the Thompson Ranch. Was something developing there? It was too soon, surely. What would Daniel think? Laura tried to ignore them, but it was difficult when even her few friends began to comment. Mary Chen, who worked at the boarding house, stopped by the store one afternoon in October. "People are talking," Mary said without preamble. She was a practical woman, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who had come to work on the railroad and stayed. "About you and Samuel Xavier." "There is nothing to talk about," Laura said tiredly. "He has been kind to me, that is all." "I know that," Mary said. "But kindness between a man and a woman always makes people curious. I just wanted you to know what is being said so you are prepared." "What are they saying?" "That you are stepping out with him. That you are disrespecting Daniel's memory. That he is taking advantage of a grieving widow." Mary paused. "For what it is worth, I do not believe any of that. Samuel Xavier seems like a decent man, and you deserve kindness after everything you have been through." "Thank you," Laura said quietly. "But truly there is nothing between us. He has been a friend, nothing more." Even as she said it, though, Laura wondered if it was entirely true. She could not deny that she felt something when Samuel was near, something that both frightened and drew her. It was not what she had felt with Daniel, that comfortable, familiar love. This was different, uncertain, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. The first snow came in late October, dusting the mountains white and bringing a sharp cold to the air. Laura was closing the store early one afternoon when Samuel came in, stamping snow from his boots. "Storm coming," he said. "Big one from the looks of the sky. You should get home before it hits." Laura looked out the window and saw the dark clouds gathering over the peaks. "I will close up now," she agreed. But as she was locking the door, Samuel said, "Laura, I wanted to ask you something." She turned to him, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Yes." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "There is a harvest dance next Saturday at the community hall. I know people have been talking, and I know you are not interested in courting or anything like that. But I thought maybe you would like to go, just as friends. Get out of the house for an evening. If people are going to talk anyway, you might as well enjoy yourself." Laura's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of going to a dance, of being seen with Samuel in such a public way, felt overwhelming. But as she looked at his face, at the genuine concern in his gray eyes, something in her shifted. "Just as friends?" she asked. "Just as friends," he confirmed. "I promise I am not trying to rush you into anything. I just thought you might like some company." Laura took a breath. "All right. Yes, I will go with you." His face broke into that rare smile again. "Good. I will come by your house at 6 on Saturday." The storm hit hard that night, dumping several inches of snow on Alta and making the streets nearly impassable. Laura spent the next few days working in the store and thinking about her decision. Part of her wanted to back out, to send word to Samuel that she had changed her mind. But another part, a part that had been dormant for nearly a year, felt something like anticipation. Saturday arrived clear and cold, the snow glittering under a brilliant sun. Laura spent longer than usual getting ready, finally settling on a dark blue dress that was not quite morning but not quite festive either. She left her hair down, the way Daniel had liked it, then felt guilty and pinned it up again. Samuel arrived exactly at 6, looking unfamiliar in a dark suit with a string tie. He had a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers that must have taken considerable effort to find. "You look beautiful," he said simply, handing her the flowers. "Thank you," Laura said, feeling her cheeks warm. "Let me put these in water and I will get my coat." The community hall was warm and crowded when they arrived, full of miners and their families, ranchers and shopkeepers, all taking a break from the hard work of survival to enjoy an evening of music and dancing. Laura felt every eye turn to them as they entered, felt the weight of judgment and speculation. Samuel seemed to sense her discomfort. He leaned down and murmured, "We can leave if you want. I will not be offended." But Laura straightened her shoulders. "No, I am tired of hiding. If they want to talk, let them talk." The evening was awkward at first. People kept their distance, watching to see what Laura and Samuel would do. But then the music started, a lively fiddle tune, and Samuel held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked formally. Laura hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough, and when he led her onto the dance floor, she felt a strange mixture of guilt and excitement. Samuel was a surprisingly good dancer, leading her through the steps with confidence. As they moved together, Laura found herself relaxing, enjoying the music and the movement. She had not realized how much she missed this, the simple pleasure of being part of the world instead of just observing it from a distance. "You are smiling," Samuel said, and she realized he was right. "I had forgotten what it felt like," she admitted. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break. Samuel fetched her some punch and they stood at the edge of the hall, watching the other couples spin and laugh. "Can I ask you something?" Laura said. "What brought you to Alta? People say you came from Wyoming or maybe Colorado." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Colorado," he finally said. "I had a ranch there with my brother. Small operation, but it was ours. Then 3 years ago, my brother and his wife were killed during a robbery. They had been in town selling cattle, and someone decided they wanted the money more than my brother needed his life." Laura's hand went to her mouth. "Samuel, I am so sorry. I sold the ranch after that," he continued, his voice flat. "Could not stand to be there without them. I have been drifting since, working different ranches, never staying long. I came to Alta because the Thompson Ranch needed help and I needed work. Did not plan to stay, but then I met you." "Me?" Laura said, startled. He turned to face her fully. "You were the first person I met who understood what it is like to lose someone and have everyone expect you to just get over it. My friends in Colorado, they gave me about 2 months before they started saying I needed to move on, find a new purpose, stop dwelling on the past. As if grief was something you could schedule, finish by a certain date." He paused. "When I heard people in town talking about you, saying the same things, I recognized it. I thought maybe you could use a friend who understood." Laura felt tears prick her eyes. "I did need that. I do need that." "Thank you." "Nothing to thank me for," Samuel said. "We all need people who understand." They stayed at the dance until late, talking more than dancing, sharing their stories of loss and survival. Laura learned that Samuel's brother had been his only family, their parents dead since they were young. She told him about Daniel, about their plans for a family, about the emptiness of the house they had chosen together. When Samuel walked her home that night, the streets were silver with moonlight on snow. At her gate, he said, "I hope this evening was all right for you. I know it was not easy." "It was better than all right," Laura said honestly. "It was the best evening I have had in a very long time." "Can I see you again?" Samuel asked. "Not at the store, I mean. Maybe we could take a ride next Sunday after church, weather permitting." Laura knew what she should say. She should thank him but decline, should maintain the boundaries she had built around herself. But looking at Samuel's face in the moonlight, seeing the hope and understanding there, she found herself saying, "I would like that." The following week passed slowly. Laura found herself anticipating Sunday with a mixture of excitement and guilt. She felt as though she was betraying Daniel, even though nothing improper had happened between her and Samuel. They were friends, just as he had promised. But she could not deny that her feelings were beginning to shift into something more complicated. Sunday dawned clear and cold. After church, Samuel met her with 2 horses, one a gentle mare that he said was perfect for her. They rode out of town, following a trail that climbed into the mountains. The world was white and still, the only sounds the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves and the occasional call of a bird. They stopped at a ridge that overlooked the valley, the town of Alta small in the distance. Samuel had brought a blanket and some food, and they sat together looking out at the vast expanse of mountains and sky. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Samuel said. "Makes everything else seem smaller somehow." "It is beautiful," Laura agreed. Then, before she could stop herself, she added, "I feel guilty." "About what?" "About enjoying myself, about spending time with you, about feeling happy again." She looked down at her gloved hands. "Daniel has only been gone a year. Sometimes I feel like I am forgetting him." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Can I tell you what I have learned about grief?" he finally said. "It does not follow a schedule. Some days it feels like it just happened. Other days you can breathe a little easier. And feeling happy again does not mean you are forgetting. It just means you are surviving." "How long did it take you," Laura asked, "to feel like you could be happy again?" "I am still working on it," Samuel admitted, "but meeting you helped. Having someone who does not expect me to be a certain way, who lets me just be where I am, that made a difference." Laura reached out and took his hand. "You have done the same for me." They sat like that for a while, hands clasped, looking out at the mountains. It was not romantic exactly, but it was something, a connection that went deeper than Laura had felt with anyone since Daniel died. As autumn turned to winter, Laura and Samuel spent more time together. They went on rides when the weather allowed. He came to her house for dinner once a week, and she learned that he was a decent cook himself, teaching her recipes he had learned during his years of working different ranches. They talked about everything, their pasts, their hopes, their fears. The town, of course, continued to talk. Margaret confronted Laura at church, saying she was disrespecting Daniel's memory. Some of the other women whispered and turned away when Laura approached, but there were also those who supported her. Mary Chen became a good friend, often joining Laura and Samuel for meals. Edward Thompson, recovered from his illness, told Laura that Samuel was the best worker he had ever had, and that he was a good man. Laura found herself caring less about what others thought. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt like herself again, like a whole person rather than just a ghost going through the motions of living. It was not until January, a full 15 months after Daniel's death, that Laura realized she had fallen in love with Samuel. They were at her house, sitting by the fire after dinner. Snow was falling heavily outside, and Samuel had stayed late to make sure the wood was stacked and the windows properly sealed against the cold. They had been talking about nothing in particular, comfortable in the silence between words, when Laura looked at him and felt her heart constrict. She loved him. It was different from how she had loved Daniel, less innocent perhaps, marked by loss and understanding. But it was real, and it was powerful, and it terrified her. Samuel must have seen something in her face because he leaned forward. "Laura, are you all right?" "I do not know," she said honestly. "Talk to me," he said gently. Laura took a shaking breath. "I think I am falling in love with you. And I do not know if I am ready for that. I do not know if I am allowed to feel that way." Samuel's face went very still. "Laura, I know we said we were just friends," she continued in a rush. "And if that is all you want, I understand. But I needed you to know. I needed to be honest." Samuel stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. "I have been in love with you since the first time you smiled at me," he said. "But I did not want to push you. I wanted to give you time to heal, to be sure of your feelings." "I am sure," Laura said, tears streaming down her face. "I am sure that I love you, but I also feel guilty, like I am betraying Daniel." "Laura, look at me," Samuel said, taking her hands. "Loving me does not mean you stop loving Daniel. The heart does not work that way. You can hold both things at once, the love you had and the love you are finding now. And if Daniel loved you the way you say he did, he would want you to be happy. He would want you to live." "How do you know?" Laura asked. "Because I know if something happened to me, I would want you to find joy again. I would want you to have a full life, even if I could not be part of it. Love does not end with death, but it does not mean you have to stop living either." Laura leaned her forehead against his. "When did you get so wise?" "I have had a good teacher," he said. "You showed me how to be patient, how to move at my own speed. Now I am just returning the favor." They stayed like that for a long time, foreheads touching, hands clasped. Finally, Samuel said, "Can I kiss you?" Laura nodded, and Samuel leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But she did not want to change her mind. When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home and embarking on a journey all at once. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deeper as Laura wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel said, "I should probably go. The snow is getting heavy." "Stay," Laura said. "I have a spare room. You can stay the night and ride back to the ranch in the morning when it is light." Samuel searched her face. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." He did stay in the spare room that night, proper and respectful. But in the morning, when Laura woke to find him already up and making breakfast in her kitchen, she felt a sense of rightness that had been missing for so long. Over the following months, their relationship deepened. They were no longer hiding what they felt, though they remained circumspect in public out of respect for Laura's position as a widow. Samuel spent more evenings at her house, and on Sundays, they took long rides into the mountains. In March, almost exactly a year and a half after Daniel's death, Samuel proposed. He did it simply, without fanfare, on a ridge overlooking the valley where they often went to talk. "Laura Vance," he said, holding her hands as the spring wind whipped around them. "I know people will say it is too soon. I know there will be talk, but I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Laura looked at this man who had been so patient with her, who had let her move at her own speed, who had never pushed or demanded but simply been there, steady and true. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They married in May, a small ceremony at the church with only a handful of people attending. Margaret did not come, still disapproving of the match, but Edward Thompson stood as Samuel's witness, and Mary Chen stood for Laura. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony, speaking about new beginnings and the healing power of love. Laura wore a pale green dress, not white but not black either, something in between that felt right for where she was in her life. Samuel wore his best suit, the one he had worn to the harvest dance where everything had changed. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and Samuel kissed her, Laura felt the last piece of her broken heart slip into place. It was not the same heart she had before Daniel died. It had been shattered and reformed, with scars that would never fully fade. But it was whole again, capable of love and joy and hope. They moved into Laura's house together, the house she had shared with Daniel. Samuel had asked if she wanted to find somewhere new, somewhere without memories, but Laura said no. The memories were part of her history, and she wanted to honor them while also making new ones. Samuel was hired as the foreman of the Thompson Ranch, a position that came with better pay and more responsibility. Laura continued to work at the general store for a few months, but in August, she discovered she was pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult at first. Laura was plagued by sickness and worry. She confided in Samuel one night that she was afraid something would go wrong, that she would lose the baby, or that something from her past would come back to haunt her. "We will face whatever comes together," Samuel assured her, holding her close. "You are not alone in this." The baby, a boy they named James Daniel Xavier, was born in early April of 1884 on a rainy spring morning. He had Samuel's gray eyes and Laura's blonde hair, and when Laura held him for the first time, she wept with joy and relief and a bittersweet happiness. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You are so loved." Samuel stood beside the bed, his hand on her shoulder, tears streaming down his own face. "He is perfect. He is," Laura agreed. Then, looking up at her husband, she added, "Thank you." "For what?" "For being patient. For letting me heal at my own pace. For loving me even when I could not fully love you back." Samuel leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You are worth waiting for. You are worth everything." As James grew, Laura found herself marveling at the life she had built. It was not the life she had planned when she married Daniel. That future had died with him in a mine collapse in Colorado. But this life, the one she had found with Samuel, was good and real and full of love. She still thought about Daniel sometimes, especially on the anniversary of his death, or when she saw something that reminded her of him. But the pain was no longer sharp and constant. It had softened into a gentle ache, a remembrance rather than a wound. When James was 2, Laura gave birth to twin daughters, Ruth and Sarah. The births were easier this time, and Samuel proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful with all 3 children. The house that had once felt too empty now rang with laughter, and the sounds of little feet running across the wooden floors. Edward Thompson died peacefully in his sleep in 1887, and he left the ranch to Samuel in his will. It was an unexpected gift, one that secured their future and gave them a legacy to pass on to their children. Samuel renamed it the Xavier Ranch, and under his management, it prospered. Laura eventually stopped working at the general store to focus on raising the children and helping run the ranch. She discovered she had a talent for managing the finances and keeping the books, and she and Samuel worked side by side to build something lasting. Margaret eventually softened toward them, especially after the children were born. She never fully approved of how quickly Laura had remarried, but she loved her grandchildren and visited often. One day when James was about 5, she said to Laura, "I was wrong about you. You are stronger than I gave you credit for." "Thank you," Laura said, surprised. "Daniel would have been happy that you found someone," Margaret continued. "He would not have wanted you to be alone. I can see that now." It was as close to an apology as Laura was likely to get, and she accepted it with grace. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their children. James grew tall and serious with his father's quiet strength. The twins were lively and bright, keeping everyone on their toes. In 1891, Laura gave birth to another son, Daniel Samuel, named for both the men she had loved. Samuel never minded that she named their youngest after her first husband. He understood that Daniel would always be part of Laura's story, and he honored that rather than resenting it. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, Samuel took Laura back to the ridge where he had proposed. The children were with Mary Chen for the evening, and they had the afternoon to themselves. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Samuel asked as they sat on the same blanket, looking out at the valley. "I remember everything about us," Laura said, leaning against his shoulder. "I remember being so scared, so lost, and I remember you being patient with me." "You were worth the patience," Samuel said. You are worth everything. I never thanked you properly, Laura said, for not pushing me. Everyone else wanted me to move on according to their timeline, but you let me move at my own speed. It was the only thing that made sense, Samuel replied. You cannot rush healing. You cannot force someone to be ready for something they are not ready for. All I could do was be there and let you know I would wait as long as it took. And I am grateful every day that you did, Laura said. She turned to look at him, this man who had become her anchor, her partner, her love. I never thought I would be happy again after Daniel died. I thought that part of my life was over. But you showed me that there can be more than one chapter to a story, more than one chance at happiness. Samuel kissed her then, sweet and slow, and Laura felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first time so many years ago. I love you, she said against his lips. I love you too, he replied. Always have, always will. They stayed on the ridge until sunset, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple over the mountains. Then they rode home together, to the house full of children and noise and life, to the future they had built together from the ashes of their pasts. Laura still visited Daniel's grave sometimes, bringing flowers and telling him about the children, about the ranch, about the life she had found. She never felt guilty anymore. She understood now that love did not diminish love, that her heart was big enough to hold all of it, the past and the present, the grief and the joy. One autumn evening when she was 42 years old and their youngest children were teenagers, Laura sat on the porch with Samuel watching the sun set over the mountains. The ranch was quiet, the work done for the day, the children inside doing homework or reading. What are you thinking about? Samuel asked. How far we have come, Laura said. How different my life is from what I expected. Better or worse? Different, Laura said. Not better or worse, just different. I loved Daniel and losing him broke something in me. But loving you healed it, or at least taught me how to live with the broken pieces. You taught me the same thing, Samuel said, reaching for her hand. After I lost my brother, I thought I would just drift forever, never putting down roots, never letting anyone get close. Then I met you, and you showed me it was possible to love again, to build a life again. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Laura thought about that telegram that had arrived on a Tuesday morning so many years ago, the one that had shattered her world. She thought about the long months of grief, of people pressuring her to move on, of feeling lost and alone. And she thought about Samuel walking into the general store, quiet and respectful, asking for work gloves and tobacco. She thought about how he had defended her against Robert Fletcher, how he had walked her home in the rain, how he had asked her to a dance just as friends, and then waited patiently while she figured out her heart. Their life together had not erased the pain of what came before. But it had proven that pain did not have to be the end of the story. That broken hearts could heal, that love could bloom even in the aftermath of loss, that moving forward did not mean forgetting what had been left behind. Thank you, Laura said softly. For what? Samuel asked, though she knew he knew. For letting me move at my own speed, she said. For not giving up on me when everyone else thought you should. I would wait 1,000 years for you, Samuel said simply, and I would do it all over again. Laura leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about their children sleeping inside, about the ranch that would be their legacy, about all the years still to come. She had not expected to be happy again. But happiness had found her anyway, in the form of a patient cowboy who understood that healing could not be rushed, that some journeys took longer than others, and that love was worth the wait. As the stars came out one by one over the mountains of Alta, Laura Vance Xavier felt at peace. Her story had not ended with tragedy. It had simply taken an unexpected turn, leading her to a future she never could have imagined but was grateful for every single day. The autumn wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and approaching winter. Inside the house, she could hear James talking to his siblings, his voice deep now that he was grown. He would take over the ranch one day, carrying on what she and Samuel had built. The twins were planning their own futures. Ruth wanted to be a teacher, and Sarah dreamed of opening a dress shop in town. Young Daniel was only 13 but already showed promise as a horseman. These were the gifts that patience had given her, that love had given her. Not a life without pain or loss, but a life that was full and rich and worth living. Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "Ready to go inside?" "In a minute," Laura said. "Let us just sit here a little longer." So they sat together as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, neither needing to speak, content in the silence and the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. They had found understanding and patience, and a love that honored the past while embracing the future. When they finally went inside, the house was warm and bright. The children looked up from their various activities, smiling at their parents. James was reading a book by the fire. The twins were working on embroidery together. Young Daniel was sketching horses in a notebook. This was home. This was family. This was the life Laura had rebuilt, piece by careful piece, with Samuel's steady presence beside her. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, Laura thought about how people had expected her to be over it by now, to have moved on according to their timetable. But Samuel had let her move at her own speed, and that had made all the difference. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Always," Samuel whispered back, pulling her close. And as Laura drifted off to sleep, surrounded by love and warmth and the life they had created together, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been long and painful at times, but it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this beautiful, hard-won happiness. The scars would always be there. The memories of Daniel would always be part of her, but they no longer defined her. She was no longer just a widow, forever frozen in grief. She was Laura Xavier, wife and mother and rancher, a woman who had survived loss and found love again, who had proven that the human heart was capable of infinite capacity for healing and hope. Outside, snow began to fall softly, covering the ranch in white, blanketing the world in quiet peace. Inside, the Xavier family slept, each dreaming their own dreams, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and safe. And in the master bedroom, Samuel held Laura close, grateful every day for the woman who had let him into her battered heart, who had trusted him enough to try again, who had shown him that second chances were real and worth fighting for. They had both been broken when they met. But together, they had built something whole and strong and enduring. Together, they had proven that love was not something that happened once and never again, but something that could bloom and grow and flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated, marked by loss and grief and the judgment of others. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was beautiful in its imperfection. As the years continued to pass, Samuel and Laura grew old together. They saw their children marry and have children of their own. They weathered droughts and harsh winters and economic downturns. They celebrated births and mourned deaths. They laughed and cried and fought and made up. Through it all, they held fast to the lesson they had learned in those early days when Samuel had courted a grieving widow against the wishes of the entire town. They held fast to the knowledge that healing cannot be rushed, that love requires patience, and that everyone must be allowed to move at their own speed. When Samuel died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Laura grieved deeply, but not with the desperate, unmoored grief she had felt when Daniel died. This grief was different, profound but grounded, because she had lived a full life with Samuel. They had been together for over 30 years, had raised 4 children, had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. She visited his grave often, bringing flowers and telling him about their grandchildren, about the ranch that James was running so well, about the dress shop that Sarah had finally opened. And sometimes she would visit Daniel's grave too, thanking him for the years they had shared and for leading her, in a strange way, to Samuel. Laura lived to be 86 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. And when she died, on a warm June morning in 1928, she did so with a smile on her face and Samuel's name on her lips. They buried her next to Samuel, under a tree that overlooked the valley they had both loved so much. And on her headstone, beneath her name and the dates of her birth and death, her children inscribed a simple phrase that captured the essence of her story. She learned that love could bloom twice, and that patience was the soil in which it grew. The Xavier Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family line, a testament to what 2 broken people had built together when one of them had the wisdom to let the other heal at her own pace. And in Alta, Utah, as the decades passed and the world changed in ways Laura and Samuel never could have imagined, their story became a legend of sorts. People told it to remind themselves that grief has no timeline, that healing cannot be forced, and that true love is patient enough to wait for hearts to mend before asking them to open again. It was a story about loss and love, about pain and healing, about a town that expected a widow to be over it by now, and a cowboy who understood that she would move at her own speed. It was a story about second chances and the resilience of the human heart. And it was, above all, a story about how the most beautiful things in life are often worth waiting for, and how patience and understanding can transform grief into hope and loneliness into love. The end came not with grand gestures or dramatic moments, but with the quiet accumulation of days well lived, of children raised with love, of a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. It came with grandchildren playing in the fields where Laura and Samuel had once ridden together, with the ranch prospering under new generations, with the knowledge that what they had built together would endure. Laura's story proved that there was life after loss, that hearts could heal, that happiness could be found again even in the aftermath of devastating grief. But it also proved that healing could not be rushed, that everyone needed to be allowed to move at their own speed, and that the most precious gift one person could give another was patience. Samuel had given her that gift, and in return, she had given him her healed heart, her trust, and a lifetime of love. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a family and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And that, in the end, was everything.